Hey, what's going on, Mission Hills Church? Welcome back to the Continuing the Conversation feed. We are so excited to have you back. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. We are Mission Hills Church, and we are a church that is real messy new. We would really encourage you guys to go back and listen to the message from this weekend. But we're your host, Colin, and
I'm Craig. I've got to ask, we've been doing this for a while, and you keep saying the same thing, and I've never gotten it. I need to ask, why is it the Continuing the Conversation feed and not podcast?
So this is a real technical piece coming into this. So we are under our messages channel. So that's kind of like where it exists within the, think of it as ESPN. So the ESPN houses
I'm so big on sports.
Well, let's see. Let's go Food Network. So there's the Food Network, and Guy's grocery games within that. There's Iron Chef, there's Chopped, all of those. So think of the Continuing the Conversation as we're Chopped, and the message is Iron Chef.
Gotcha. So it's a feed within a podcast.
Feed within a channel.
Kind of. Okay.
Yeah. So this is kind of our midweek feed that comes in. So
Love it. Okay.
Yeah, just kind of a little bit of a technicality coming in there. And not only are we a feed, but we're also a video podcast now.
Are we a video feed?
Video podcast, technically, is what they call it now.
So welcome to the podcast, the feed. I'm so confused, but I love the intentionality of what you're doing.
It's the little part of my day where the marketing brain gets to turn on.
Well, and it's. I mean, obviously, we didn't plan this. I totally threw you off. I'm sorry, but one of our core values as a church is that we're intentionally improving, and it's not improving. It's not accidentally improving.
It's intentionally.
Not inadvertently. It's intentionally improving. And so I love the intentionality of the way you're thinking. I knew there was a thought. I just didn't know what it was. I'd never asked it. So
there was a thought. I don't know if it's always cohesive thoughts that are going on in my brain, but
I mean, things are messy, right?
Yes.
Like, YouTube's messy, so not everything fits in a perfect bucket, which I hate because I love my nice buckets. But I do really like the intentionality of it. So yeah, thanks for indulging that. So sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Welcome to the Continuing the Conversation feed/podcast/
video.
Thing.
And now Spotify is actually hosting video podcasts on its platform as well, now that they have become also the number one podcast streamer. So they have overtaken Apple.
Yeah.
So
we're just glad to be with you. Right? I'm glad to be with you, Colin. We're glad to be with all of our listeners, our viewers, our participants,
listeners, watchers,
whatever.
Everybody on the in-between.
We're glad to be with you. That was a weird side.
No, this is perfect. For the people that are returning with us, probably enjoy that. And for the people that are with us the first time, I hope you're still with us. So this week we kicked off a brand new sermon series, and not only a sermon series, correct me if I'm, now I'm going to ask you terminology here. It is a giving initiative, correct? Not a campaign.
Yeah, I would say it's not a giving initiative.
It's an initiative.
It's bigger than that.
Yes.
Giving is definitely a piece of it, but we're going to have to go beyond ourselves in a lot of areas in order to accomplish the vision that God's given us, what we're calling the front range vision. And so that is going beyond in serving, it's going beyond in giving, it's going beyond in the way that we think about who we are and what it means to follow Jesus here on the front range. I mean, it's beyond in a lot of ways that accelerate us towards our 100-year anniversary as a church. So it definitely does have a strong giving component, but I would call it an initiative.
Yes.
It's the Beyond Initiative.
Which, if you guys are just joining us, or maybe you missed the message this weekend and you were not introduced to this right up front, go back and please check that out. Yeah. We'll put it in the show notes as well. It's beyond.missionhills.org. You guys can go learn all about it there. And we have some prayer prompts that you guys can opt into as well. If you text Beyond to 80875, we'd love for you guys to be a part of that as well. Also, if you go to the website, I'm going to give a little shout out to our video producer here who is behind the cameras today, made an incredible, it's like a cinematic experience.
It's awesome, Zach. We love you and we love that video.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And it's going back through the last 83 years of a church. And I want to sit on that for a second here. Is Mission Hills is very unique in a million different ways. And the fact that we are 83 years old is unbelievable. I mean, just that right there. I mean, you and I have been on staff we're coming up on our 9 year, I think. I came on in a March and you came on in a September of the same year. And so we're coming up on our decade almost. But just the fact that there was, 4 of those before us is wild.
Yeah. I think if I'm remembering right, I'm the 7th lead pastor in those 83 years, which is actually a little unusual too.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the most recent numbers, but I do know a couple of years ago when they did some studies on this, the average tenure of a pastor at a church was about 3 years. Wow. Now, there's a lot of factors in that. So some of those are going to be, churches where the denomination intentionally moves people every 3 years. But 3 years is on average, and 83 years, 7 pastors. like that's not the average. You got some long-term people who have led this church up to this point, and I'm really privileged to still be going after 8, working on 9 years. Yeah,
That's so cool. And so you and the elder boards over the last couple of years have helped lead us through what we call the Front Range Vision. MHA is a part of that, our Mission Hills Association. If you go to missionhillsassociation.org, you can check that out too. It's our way of kind of like reaching out to the Front Range and helping out and coming alongside a bunch of other churches kind of in the area. But it's to reach every lost person along the Front Range, because as you pointed out in the Beyond campaign or Beyond initiative launch from this weekend, it is a small number here on the Front Range. You don't think of Colorado as being an unchurched area. Usually I don't think of the United States as being an unchurched area. You kind of think of that as a third world issue a lot of the time. But I mean, it's right here in our backyard.
Yeah, if you think about unchurched in terms of they have not heard the gospel, or have not been exposed to Christianity, or do not have any knowledge of Christians or what Christianity is about, then yeah, I mean, America is definitely not unchurched.
Right.
And there are parts of the world where they've never met a Christian. Some places they've never heard the word Jesus, and there are large swaths of the population of the world that, even if they heard the word Jesus, they really don't know what Christianity is. And so in that sense, they're unchurched in a way that's different than the United States. On the other hand, if you mean by unchurched, they are not engaged in, I don't know maybe if unchurched is exactly the right language. It's
That's fair.
People get it, and so we use it. But what we're really talking about is being engaged in a personal, saving, life-changing, eternity-transforming relationship with God through faith in his son Jesus and what he's done for us. That's really kind of what we're talking about. Now, that I believe that in general, and I know we're kind of in an era where there's a real push even among followers of Jesus to kind of like get rid of their association with a formal, organized religion. So I love Jesus, but I don't like the church.
Sure.
So I understand that there's some complexity going on there, but I think in general throughout history and in the Bible, having that relationship with Jesus necessarily means that you come into a community of his followers. It's just not a solo sport. Following Jesus is not a solo activity. And so what do we call that community of followers? What's the church? So what do we mean when you say you're unchurched here on the Front Range? Well, we mean you probably don't have that personal relationship, and therefore, consequently, you don't have that relationship with the community. So I think we just mean slightly different things by unchurched. Yeah, very few people have never heard about Jesus or don't understand at least the raw material of the gospel.
Right.
But it's they think of it as religion rather than relationship, and consequently we'd say no. So you're unchurched in that respect.
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect description of kind of the target audience, so you will to say, as my marketing brain has now been turned on since the beginning of this episode. And the fact that we are able to come alongside what God is planning right now in the Front Range over the next 17 years to see what that could look like is really exciting. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, coming from a little bit of a smaller church before you were at Mission Hills here, you were at Ridgeline down in Colorado Springs, which was just...
Castle Rock.
I'm sorry.
Not quite that far.
Down in Castle Rock, and now you're up here in Littleton and Castle Rock and North Littleton as we are kind of expanding out here in our multi-site. What was it like going through this process with developing out this Beyond initiative at a just kind of a church of our size, as to put it bluntly?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So when I was down at Ridgeline, by the way, shout out if we got any Ridgeline people listening. We still have friends there and love that church.
Happy to have you.
And we have sent one of our group's pastor came out of Mission Hills and went down as lead pastor there. So, Chris, hope you're doing I know you're doing a great job. I hope you're having a good time in that process. Yeah, so when I was at Ridgeline, I was only the lead pastor there for, officially for a year. Mm-hmm. There were a few months before that where I was the official interim, but I wasn't the permanent. So I was only there as the lead guy for less than 2 years. So I never went through a campaign like this with them. I watched one. The lead pastor went through one, and I participated in it, but I wasn't directly involved in it. So I got to Mission Hills, and within the first, about a year in, we were kind of maxed out on our Littleton campus, and we only had that campus. The worship services were at the danger zone, which is about 80% of capacity, because people start going, I can't find seats for 2 or 3 of us together. And so, it's not that they leave the church, but they're like, I'm just not going to go as often. And so it's interesting. If you take your worship center room and you go, well, there's like, say there's 1,000 seats, which is roughly what we had before. You go, okay, well, here's our attendance charts. Here's 1,000, here's the line at the 1,000. And you can see it. Like, we would spike over 80%. Spike over 80%, every single time. And we would overlay all our services on there and go, I don't know why exactly. We're guessing about can't find seats, but I tell you what, when 80% of your room is full, you don't grow. You just don't grow. That's a big lid. So I'd been here about a year, and we were doing that, and so we had to do a campaign intended to expand the worship center. We called it, finish the build out here at Littleton. So we expanded the worship center, so we got up to about 2,000 seats, and then we built the Grove Auditorium, which allowed us to do our 8 a.m. service, which is never going to be as big.
Which it's not intended to be.
It's not intended to be, and we're going to be able to do that in a more appropriate space, and there were some other kinds of improvements that we made along the way. So that was my first really campaign leading it, and I'm going to be honest, I hated it. I hated everything about it, and there were a couple reasons for that, Colin. One of them was I hadn't yet learned what it meant to pastor people when it comes to money. I was still sort of in that mode of, I grew up in the era of the televangelists who were all about send me your money. I was like, man, I don't want anything to do with that. And
you and the bakers on TV not jiving.
Yeah, I was so uncomfortable with that because of the way I grew up. And I know a lot of people associate the church with money. I've had people tell me that. I don't think you care about Jesus. I don't think you care about me. You just care about getting my dollars.
Yeah, this idea of prosperity gospel and kind of the Joel Osteens and taking over from that. I can see that.
So that was part of the problem. I had not yet learned really that by avoiding conversation about money and avoiding conversation about giving, I was actually shirking my responsibility to shepherd the flock that I'd been entrusted with. I just didn't really get that. And Mission Hills, honestly, the giving was pretty good. And so I was like, I don't need to, right? But then I really, this is where I began to understand what you hear me say a lot, which is I began to understand this isn't about what I need from you. It's about what I want for you, right? So when the giving was decent, okay, well, then why would I talk about giving, right? Because if the giving's decent and I choose, therefore, not to talk about giving, it actually is about what I'm getting. It's not about the people and what God wants for them. But it took me a while to begin to learn that. So that was one of the reasons it was called the Imagine Initiative. The Imagine campaign was difficult for me. I was just so really uncomfortable because I didn't really understand how to think about these things. And the other one was just I was still just figuring out how to do anything at a church this size because it's very, very different. And I think I probably have naturally decent instincts for a larger church because I think organizationally probably first before I think super relationally. Obviously relationships are the heart of everything, but I'm more naturally wired to think, okay, organizational strategy, we would do this. Now let's implement it relationally as opposed to I'm thinking relationally and then implement it organizationally. The bigger church just makes a little more sense to me, but I was still learning all that. So that was a really uncomfortable campaign. And quite honestly, I ended the first campaign and I sort of said, I'm never going to do this again. And I leaned in. And
you're always famous last words when you utter them to God.
I leaned in and I said, instead of doing campaigns on any kind of a regular basis, let's just lean into discipling about generosity. And so let's lean in on basically increasing generosity. Because that's good for people, and as a byproduct, it's also good for the church. But really, I'm more at that point going. It's more about the people, and then let's push down expenses. Right? Let's try to keep our expenses from growing as fast as they want to. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create financial margin. As we create financial margin, we're not going to have to do these anymore. It'd be awesome. And then I genuinely felt like God said to me, "I've got bigger things for you to do, and what you need to do them." It's not in your hand, but it is in the house. I sense the Lord. I don't get a lot of these kinds of things, but I sense the Lord say to me, you know what I'm calling this church to, and you do not have the resources in your hand to do those things. It's not in your hand, but it is in my house. And so, okay, gonna lean into this, and we're doing the Beyond Initiative because it's an obedience thing. And yeah, it's going to be good for people, and it's going to be necessary to get some of the momentum going as we aim towards that 100-year thing. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but that's some of my heart stuff as I've gone through the last 8, working on 9 years here, big church campaigns, these kinds of things. Here's what's hard about this one. It's not like the Imagine. The Imagine was, we need to like knock that wall up, put these seats up, we need to build a room here.
Which, how cool was it that the architect, when they originally designed the building, they go, you're going to need to expand this, and they built that margin into it, like you were kind of talking about this financial margin we're building, and they built physical space into it that we could expand out into. What a great, absolutely. God is good that he had that plan for us.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, it really was. I was so impressed by that. Yeah, but that one was really concrete. Yeah. The Beyond the Initiative is a little bit less concrete, and there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is it's really not a building campaign. There are some building projects kind of worked into it, but it's really not a building campaign, and so that it's a little less concrete for that reason. But the other reason is simply because it's actually about increasing our operating budget, not because we're not making budget. It's increasing our operating budget because there are opportunities that need to be seized. There's probably some strategic hires that need to be made. There's blessings in the communities that we need to do. We need to expand what we're doing in all of areas of ministry so we can unleash more followers of Jesus to live on mission with him. And so we're actually, the goal of the campaign is $53 million, which sounds like a really big number, but honestly, our current operating budget is $13.5 million. So Beyond the Initiative is 2 years. So if you go 13.5, we keep exactly where we are times 2, it's 27, right? And actually, when we began this process last year, it was 13, so it would have been 26. Over 2 years, it would have been, but now we're at 13.5. So 27 if we do nothing different. Like if we stay exactly where we are in every way, we need to get to 27 million. So 27 of the 53 million would just be same operating budget. But we need to expand ministry. If we're going to really start to accelerate towards the Front Range vision, there are things that we need to do. We need to expand ministries in every area of ministry. And so 29 of the 53 is actually just that expanded ministry budget. It's not a special project. It's got to be regular giving because we're going to have to be able to sustain that afterwards. So we're building towards that. Then the other 24 million is for really it's opportunity investment. I'm finding myself consistently saying it is for removing obstacles and seizing opportunities. So like we have obstacles, our North Littleton campus, Espanol campus is totally maxed out. And trying to figure out how do we allow them to reach more people because their services are already at that danger point where like you can't grow anymore. Okay, second service, but that's hard because we got 2 campuses sharing the same facility. We probably need to make the facility a little bit bigger. We're trying to figure out how to do that. That's a remove an obstacle. And then there's seize opportunities. So investments in Mission Hills Association, so we can come alongside, strengthen, equip, just motivate, move, support, all that stuff, other churches on the Front Range to reach everybody and unleash their missional followers. So there are opportunities to be seized and there are obstacles to be removed. And that 24 million is related largely to that. But it's a little bit less concrete than, we're going to build that building over here and here's the plans. See exactly it's going to be this and you're going to drive in here. It's just a lot more nuanced than that. So that's a little thing that's a little bit challenging about this, which is why we're doing what we call one fund.
Yep.
Which is it's a pretty interesting way of thinking about this. I really like it. You don't give to that building fund because we're not, as I keep saying, we're actually not funding a project. We're fueling a mission. We're fueling a movement. Right, and so you just give to one fund, and we have breakdowns about like how all that will be spent. And you can find that on the beyond.missionhills.org website, and you can see the buckets and much more specifics there. But it really is less that thing right there, and more who we are as a people and what it looks like for us to accelerate towards that 100-year anniversary. So that's a lot of information. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. I think that's exactly what I wanted to push into with this, and I love the fact that over the course of developing this, the first and foremost investment that Mission Hills has made is in the people that God has placed in the current ministries. The way that you guys have communicated is, hey, we have an awesome staff, we have an awesome serve team, and we want to make sure, first and foremost, that you guys are loved and taken care of well. And that is kind of that first part of that operating budget that you were talking about. And then the second part that I think you and I get really excited about because of how we are wired is this kind of 30,000-foot overview of creating space to see how God can move forth in the kingdom. Because I think you and I do well with the concrete stuff, but I think where we get excited is looking that 17 years down the road to can you imagine what could be all these different things that could be in place because we have helped create space so God can move. And that was one of the ways that you pitched that to the staff right at the beginning when we initially started talking about this is imagine where we can be if we are, good servants of where God wants to direct us. And so I think that's a really cool way of looking at this too. But yes, I would highly encourage you guys go in the show notes. If you go to missionhills.org, it's linked in a couple different places too. Or if you just want to go to beyond.missionhills.org, you can check all of this out too. We'll be going through this Beyond series. We hit the first week this last week. We got 5 more weeks of it coming up. So we would really love for you guys to go check that out a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to push back into the generosity piece that you were talking a little bit about how money makes people uncomfortable. I will say you helped reorient my mind around this when we first started doing some of this stuff, 8 years ago when you came onto staff, is thinking about it as time, talent, and treasure. Because I think where people get hung up is on this treasure portion of it too. It's like, oh, the church wants my money.
Hey, can I ask you?
Yes, please.
Because that's something I've changed on. I'm no longer saying time, talent, and treasure.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually saying time, treasure, and touch.
Okay.
Because there's a weird
Push
thing.
into that.
There's a weird thing in English that the word talent is like, oh, it's the skill I have. But in the Bible, the word talent is money.
Okay.
So, like, from a biblical perspective, time, talent, and treasure is really money, time, money.
Time, money.
And really, too, I also began to realize that, well, what am I doing with my time? Well, I'm actually using my talent, right? Like, ideally, and you and I know
all these
this,
things are overlapping.
As a staff, our job is not to do the ministry. Our job is to build the teams that do the ministry. Our job is to discover the people and their gifts, develop their gifts, and then deploy them in their gifts. And so, like, ideally, we don't want a ton of people doing things that have nothing to do with the way God's equipped them and gifted them, right?
Yes.
So time is actually always about talent. So really, I was like, well, do we break it down then to is it treasure and time? And I had a friend who told me, said that, well, there's also a generosity of touch, which is the generosity of spirit. It's the generosity that says, you know what, I'm going to believe the best about you, even though maybe you haven't given me all the evidence that proves it, but I'm going to choose to believe the best about you. I'm going to be open to being hospitable. Like, I've got an extra room in my house, right? It's not going to cost me anything for you to stay there, except that, you're going to be in my house for a while, right?
Yeah.
And my wife and I have done this a fair amount. That's a touch. So I'm actually, that nowadays, I'm like, it's about treasure, time, and touch. Being
Treasure,
generous
time,
with those
and
three
touch.
things. But it's not just treasure, and that was your point. So I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sorry
No.
for the sidebar there, but you're right. It's not just treasure.
I'd rather be correct, so that's good. I like moving forward with that. But in that same instance, I think that helps open up a lot of people's eyes to how else we can serve and reorient ourselves to the mission that God has put forth for us. And the reason I say that is because you had a point in your sermon this weekend where you talked about worship is a reorientation to our Savior. And I wanted to push into that specific piece with you a little bit here, because as somebody who is one of the best balances of right and left brains I've ever met, because you were worship pastor for a long time, and then you just did this really deep dive into organizational structure and forecasting vision. I think you made the point that worship, people tend to think of that as just singing songs. And I wanted to push into acts of worship a little bit here as we kind of think about what generosity looks like. Can you talk about maybe what that looks like in your life, your family's life, how you encourage people in kind of this acts of worship, the piece of the messaging that you hit on this weekend?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, and let me say this as a foundational piece to this. I think one of the reasons, I'm going to be really real with you and vulnerable with you. One of the reasons that I originally started using that language that you picked up on, we need to be generous with time, talent, and treasure, right? And I would sometimes say it's not time, talent, or treasure. It's time, talent, and treasure.
Yes.
But honestly, I was kind of wimping out. It's because I didn't want to talk about money. And the reality is, when the Bible talks about giving and acts of giving in general, it's always money.
Which is mentioned, I think you have
more
this number?
than 800 times.
Yeah, I was going to say, more than every day of the year.
Yeah. And so the time, talent, and treasure was a little bit of like, yeah, but it's not just about money, because I don't want to talk about money. But the reality is money is hands down the number one thing the Bible says you've got to give your money. And I think it's because of this reason that it's this desire to acquire that it can destroy us if we allow it to drive us, right? And we talked about this weekend. And by moving the conversation to other things, I'm actually not dealing with the power of money, right? I'm not saying the other things don't matter, but by trying to move away from it, I was actually just trying to get out of what was uncomfortable for me. So I think that's important to say. Having said that, though, and keeping that in mind, the reality is, worship is a reorientation. It's not just an acknowledgement. You are God. It's an actual change in the direction we're moving, the thing that we're in orbit around, and what it is that is driving our lives, right? And so even the word worship, in Greek, the main word is proskuneo, which in pros means towards, and kuneo means to kiss. And it was a reference to the act that when somebody saw somebody coming towards them that they were under the authority of, they would drop to their knees, they would blow kisses at them, right? The little cute thing that we do with parents now was actually a profound thing back in those days. Because what it's saying is, listen, I know who you are and I know who I am. You're up here, I'm down here. Like, I'm not going to come up and just give you a bear hug, right? I'm not going to come up even just think that I have the right to just shake your hand because your guards are probably going to kill me if I come at you, like, right? No, actually, because I know who you are and I'm under your authority, I'm going to bow down at this place. I'm going to blow a kiss towards you. So kiss towards, proskuneo, worship. That's the number one word for worship in the Bible. What's happening in that is not just I see who you are. It's a tangible act of I'm acting in a way that recognizes that reality and reorients to it. I'm not just going to keep walking. I'm not just going to turn around and go the other direction. No, I'm actually everything's going to hit pause, and I'm going to go, I'm oriented towards you. Now, that's a pretty powerful image for what worship is, right? That not just recognize, right, you're God. I sang the song that you're God. I said it. What do you want? Yeah. No, I actually want your life to reflect it, right? And so reflection of that reality requires not just a recognition of it, but a reorientation, a rewalking, a change in behavior, okay? So acts of worship, I do think there's a reason, as I said, why, first and foremost, it's actually acts of giving financially, because that's the number one thing that has the ability to take our hearts away from him. It is the number one thing. It's not a coincidence that Jesus said you cannot serve both God and money. You're going to serve one, but he didn't say you can't serve both God and sexual identity. He didn't say you cannot serve both God and personal fulfillment. I mean, those are in there, but the number one thing is actually possessions. And I actually think there's a whole conversation. I actually think it's partly what it means to be made as the image of God. It's a corruption of that, because we were made to be stewards over the earth. So, of course, what is sin corrupted? Instead of being stewards over the earth, we're collectors of it.
Oh, interesting.
Say there's a theology behind that. But the number one thing that he says that will allow you to reorient yourself to God's is actually how you deal with possessions, or the capital that allows you to acquire the possessions, the money. But it doesn't stop there, and that is important to recognize. So for me, acts of worship are often being generous with touch. I'm going to be hospitable, right? As an introvert, I don't really want anybody else in my house, right? Love my wife, love my kids.
There's room for the dogs.
I have adult kids now, and honestly, as much as I love being with them when they go home, as the introvert, I'm like, nice, got my house back, right? Like, I never want them to go, but once they've gone, I'm like, oh, this is kind of nice. And so to have a house guest, like whether it's a missionary or even just friends who are like, hey, we're going to be in the area, that's a generosity of touch, and that's an act of worship for me. I'm very conscious of that. I'm like, you have given me this house so that I can be a blessing. I am choosing to honor you and obey you, Lord, in opening up that bedroom or that basement or whatever it is. That is an act of worship, because it's an act of reorientation, and it's not just a record. You're God, so I thank you for my house. You're God, you bless me with this house so that I can be a blessing. I'm actually going to do that. That's moving from recognition to reorientation. Generosity of time, whether it's with my kids or other people, right? That is actually reorientation. It's not when I go, Lord, thank you for this day. It's, how do you want me to use it? Right? Thank you, not just thank you for this food, but how do you want me to use this conversation with my wife over this food that you've given, or this conversation with this couple we're hanging out with, this conversation with this member from the church or this friend? That's what's happening. And again, they're connected. It's recognition first, but it moves to reorientation, and I believe it's when it moves to reorientation that worship is really happening, because otherwise it's lip service. Even as we might be sincere about it, it's ultimately lip service if it doesn't change behavior.
No, that's really good. I like that a lot. It's a cool way of thinking about how you keep the main thing, but like, how do you look beyond that to the application aspect of this in your life?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good take home piece for you. As we kind of wind down our time here, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about that I think is a really cool peek behind the scenes. Craig is not, believe it or not, Craig is not AI, and all of his messages don't always line up with each other. I think it's really cool how even on Saturdays, you're kind of still thinking about how is God working through this message to deliver what he wants the congregation to hear. And so I usually attend the Saturday night with my wife, my 4-year-old. And so we didn't get a piece of the message that I think you added in on Sunday here that I wanted to touch on a little bit here, just because I think it's super interesting kind of as we round out the message here, as you talked about the cure and Enoch and just this other kind of piece that we've talked about the cutting room floor a couple times on this podcast here, how sometimes interesting pieces don't quite make it into the message here, but and every once in a while stuff you'll give a Saturday and then you know what, I need that in there, and then we'll go to the Sunday and you'll put it back in. Can you walk through?
Or I don't need that in there, which allows me to get this piece in there, which is something. So I think I actually went faster through a few things on Sunday than I did on Saturday, which allowed me to do this other thing. Yeah, so. If we go back to what we were kind of talking about, that Genesis 1 and 2 is God creates, Genesis 3 is sin corrupts, Genesis 4 is the beginning of God cures, going all the way to Revelation. I mean, that totally works with everything I was talking about, which is like this dealing with the desire to acquire. That's actually at the core of the cure, right? But what I didn't get a chance to talk about, and I didn't expect to, but I finally decided to throw it back in for Sunday, was that I actually think we do begin to see the cure happening. So at the end of the message, I was saying, like, if you don't deal with the desire to acquire, it's going to destroy you. If you deal with the desire, it will change your direction, right? Like, things will go different. So after everything goes wrong, Cain kills Abel, God says the ground is cursed because of you, because the ground is the core issue, and that's where you acquired. And so now you're not going to get to acquire because that's the punishment fits the crime, ultimately, the root of it, right? What happens next is Cain has a child, and he names the child Enoch. And in Hebrew, Enoch basically means learned. And then he builds a city, and a city, of course, is a whole bunch of people, and he names the city Enoch. And I don't think it's just because, I just want to honor my son. The word Enoch, learned, comes up twice in a row really quickly. Not a coincidence. Well, remember, one of the things the desire to acquire does is it drives you to see other people as a barrier or a burden. So he killed Abel. Get rid of the competition. He has a child, and he says, I've learned. I'm seeing people different. He builds a city and surrounds himself with people because he goes, I've learned. They're not the competition. They're not the barrier. They're not the burden. They're actually at the heart of the blessing. So that change in orientation and that change in dealing with this desire to acquire that was driving him actually changed his direction in life really substantially. And I think that's really cool. But to really unpack it, I need a little bit more time. Even just to do that, on Saturday night, I was like, ooh, I'm out of time. so I rearranged a couple of things to get that in. Because I really think in that, you do see the cure is actually beginning.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Craig, this is always one of my, the highlights of my week here. I'm excited to see where we go, kind of pushing into the next 5 weeks of our Beyond series here. Again, if you guys want to connect with any of this, we would really love for you to go check out beyond.missionhills.org. Twice in this podcast, you mentioned kind of the big C church and involvement in community. So if you guys are looking for any sort of a group involvement, anything like that, we have life groups here. We have community groups. We have men's and women's Bible studies. If you guys are interested in that, use our group finder. We'll link that in the show notes. And as always, we have a really cool YouTube playlist where Craig tackles a bunch of questions called Questions with Craig. So if you're looking for any more resources, we'd love for you guys to check that out. Give us a little review as we're kind of diving into the video podcast realm here. We'd love
give
that.
us a good review.
Yeah. 5 stars always looks good.
Dave Ramsey says, if you want to give us a 1-star review, give us a call.
That's really good.
Don't give us a review. But 5-star helps.
Phone numbers
really
in
helps.
the footer on the website too, if you guys want to give
absolutely.
us a call. But Craig, this has been awesome, and we're excited to see
Always
you guys
love
next
being
week.
with you. God bless.
This podcast is hosted by Colin McFarland along with Craig Smith. We are mixed, edited, and produced by Zach Anderson. Our creative director is Colin McFarland. Maddie Brouwer is our SEO and copy specialist. The Continuing the Conversation feed is part of the Mission Hills Podcast Network in Littleton, Colorado, and available for download wherever you get your audio and video podcasts. Thanks for listening.